Please welcome Corey Birtles.
Keep it high energy. Uh, yeah, I'm sorry it has to be Saturday morning at 9 a.m. for you all. I'm sure that you want to be back home having a spring brunch with your pals, but here we are. You're with the data guy talking about third-party data. I think a little bit of my presentation is kind of a bit of the thunder is taken out of it, I think, by some of the things that were just mentioned, because I kind of feel privileged that, I'm here speaking on the last day, the second to last session, about a topic that pretty much has been a prevalent topic throughout the 3 days. Pretty much every vendor, every session has actually mentioned the importance of first-party data, and it's kind of the underlying kind of infrastructure that drives a lot of the products that we now use across the industry. So I think it's kind of prescient that I'm now speaking here about it and summarizing it for you on a lot of the things that have been discussed. So I suppose it depends on where you put the punctuation. First party data. To make it a little bit fun, I mean, it's a pretty dry topic, so I'm hoping that today I can kind of add a little bit of flavor to some of the things that we've been discussing. As was mentioned, I'm the SVP Data and Analysis at Digitas, part of the Publicis Group. I've been there for 9 years, 10 years here in the US, hence my funny accent. Earlier this year, last few months, I've been working as the data lead on Samsung. So it's a fairly huge account with about 400 people working on it. 120 or so are actually part of the data team. So we have a pretty significant kind of presence there on the team. Samsung's a huge client for Digitas and Publicis, but their focus on data has actually been, one of the reasons why I joined the team. When I was offered it, I was kind of like, oh goodness, it's going to be a lot of work, as you'd imagine. But actually, the Samsung team is kind of at the forefront of a lot of the technology that we actually do today. So I was excited to join the team and lead that part of the organization. So I've got a few things to cover off on today. Why first-party data matters. Going into a deep dive in some of the challenges that we actually face on it. And then also I'm going to review some opportunities to collect first-party data, some unique ways of doing that, as well as use it. And then finally I'm going to touch on the evolving strategy to future-proof some of our marketing efforts in first-party data. So why does first-party data matter? So don't take my word for it. I mean, it's kind of a little bit of a case of everyone else is doing it, so why shouldn't we in a lot of cases? But these two eMarketer slides here, they actually really highlight the importance that marketers see as first-party data. So on the left-hand side, you've got here both small, medium, and large organizations see first-party data as the most important data types. And then on the right-hand side, you've got those same marketers, broken out by those with strong ROI, actually seeing first-party data as the kind of leading reason why their success is driving their better ROI. So it's certainly something that the marketplace is seeing. What was interesting as well is one of the presentations, Roland from HP, he's here. He shared his vision on how to run his printer business, and first-party data was the foundation of that plan, essentially. The folks involved in the retail media conversations also talked a lot about the interaction that they might have on their site, also driven by first-party data. And then during the COVID crisis, smart organizations actually focused on first-party data, and that was also on the discussion on, I think it was Thursday. And all of which is really kind of, the focus on first-party data is so important to us, and anyone who's not thinking about it, really should. But I would say that, out of all of those different examples, why are we so bad at it is probably the question that I wanted to pose today. So it seems like every month or quarter, there's a significant change. This timeline here really highlights across the last 5 years some significant decisions that have been made by large companies out there in the marketplace that have then driven really massive change within our own organizations in the way that we measure the efficacy of our marketing efforts. Starting from way back with Apple and Safari, I think an important point to make here is that when we think about the deprecation of the cookie, for example, it happened 5 years ago, if you really think about it. Back then, with Safari, shortening the expiration down to 24 hours on the cookie, it was really the start of significant change in that space. And then, future-proofing, looking at the future here where we've got the likes of Google who are delaying the cookie deprecation into next year now, but it's inevitable that this is going to change, this is going to happen. With the importance of first-party data growing in response to a lot of these regulations is really something that we should not forget. So it's so important it now underpins marketers' ability to future-proof. So on the left-hand side, we have another eMarketer survey that was posed, which really highlighted the importance of, with the deprecation of the cookie, the importance of various strategies within marketers' teams. So you've got 67% of people who are now building or considering building a CDP. You've got 62% who are now really focused on first-party data strategies as a result. And on that left-hand chart there, you've actually got it broken out by different industries. And one important factor, which has been mentioned a couple of times, is that different industries kind of experience things a little bit differently. In the case of something like travel, two of my clients previously, Delta and Marriott, are two examples of companies that have a really sound first-party data strategy. They have really solid first-party data, good understanding of their customers. And that's just by nature of their business. You have people signing in to websites, you have people traveling with their name and all of that kind of stuff. So they have a really good CRM base to work from. But when you look at consumer packaged goods, often selling their product through third-party retailers, you have that break. They don't have a lot of that first-party data information. So the kind of balance of and use of first-party data and how you use it is going to be different across industries. But yet, if you look at that chart there, marketers in all of those industries actually still see the challenge is the same. They still need to build up their first-party data, and there's some really unique ways of building their first-party data in the case of some of the challenging ones like consumer packaged goods. And on the right-hand side, you have, the question is, how will the change in support for third-party audience cookies affect the use of data for data professionals? And 60.4% said increased spending and emphasis on the use of first-party data. So clearly, really important part of any kind of conversation around deprecation of the cookie. And then the last point that was raised here is the creation of private ID graphs. So I think that number's pretty high, 60%. But I think that the way the questions were posed is it's consideration for, so they all know that it's inevitable that they create their own ID graph to support their business and work to kind of dedupe down to the single customer. So why do we use? What is the benefit of first-party data? So I think an important part of this is transparency. So first-party data can be more transparent. It can be more accurate and a more accurate representation of the customer. It's often direct from the source, so that second point there around quality opted-in audiences, it enables us to go direct to the source and more often than not give customers the opportunity to opt in or out of certain pieces of information being stored about them. It's more rich, so richer customer data can drive incremental benefit to businesses. And then, because of all of the nature of first-party data, it's owned by the business more often than not. And although there are costs to collecting and storing and working with it, the actual data itself doesn't have a cost or CPM like a lot of other data that we might work with in a third-party sense. You also have the ability to control recency. So there are certain use cases that you might want to develop that enable you to kind of refresh at a certain rate and manage the tailoring of certain use cases. And then the last point there is that it gives us more precision and flexibility to deliver unique insights about individuals. So that's the kind of, overarching benefit of first-party data. So we'll go deep dive now. I'm going to focus on the two things on the left side here for those who haven't heard of zero-party data before and first-party data. I kind of see it as like a proactive on the left-hand side and a reactive first-party data on the right-hand side. We're going to focus on that today to review kind of that first-party data. It doesn't kind of decrease the importance of second-party data, being that you are and you should consider developing partnerships with data partners to increase the all parts of this data ecosystem. But really, it should be kind of secondary to the effort you have in first-party data to try to kind of really drive that. And I like that the numbering is first, second, and third because you really should be focusing on first, second, and third. So there are loads of different types of first-party data. Here is a representation of a whole bunch of them. You could develop out, a solid loyalty program, for instance, where you're developing out a lot of the data around the customer that you know and storing it in a way that actually helps you to understand those customers more. In the same way, you could store the data in a CRM, and then that could influence how you email market them, and then a whole lot of data around site analytics, and then also the paid world as well. All of that really starts to develop out the three types of data that I've got listed on the right-hand side there. So around behaviors, attitudes, and preferences, and all of that information should be kind of developed and stored in a single place, preferably. And I know that there was some conversation about that in a few other sessions that we had, but the importance of kind of bringing that together and being able to tie it together to a single deduped individual is kind of part of this whole ecosystem. So different use cases I've listed here. I won't go into every one of them, but a few that you will be familiar with: retargeting customers who express purchase intent, personalized messages or offers. We've talked a lot about kind of right time, right place, etc. And then incorporating, I think a really important one is incorporating the online and offline transactions. So, really trying to think about, the digital interactions that someone might have and how to bring that back to, let's say, a retailer that has an in-store experience or something that's kind of offline is super important. So we try to develop out really cool, development of first-party data solutions that tie those things together is part of it. So if we do all of that and hopefully are successful in that, this BCG study here highlights that you can get some significant lift in revenue and also cost efficiency. So there's definitely some benefit to going down this path. So there are some challenges with first-party data for sure. It's not easy. So a lot of the points that were raised in a few of these surveys here around companies and their use of first-party data and the way that they see themselves really highlights that we're not necessarily kind of there yet. 40% of customers say they are only tapping into a small part of their first-party data potential. 66% report not having the ability to collect, integrate data across multiple online and offline channels. And this astounding number of 99% feel that they aren't using adequate data to deliver a cross-channel experience, which is pretty huge. And the last point there, which kind of touches on what I was talking about before, retailers with e-commerce and brick-and-mortar stores are not collecting sufficient customer data to tie those things together. And so 64% of respondents felt that as well. But if you're smart about it and address these 4 challenges, I think that will go some way in developing a solid strategy for you. So we start off with the first challenge of privacy and regulation. So across the globe, there are 128 countries that have already put in place restrictions or privacy legislation that attempts to protect consumer privacy. So we're already there. We have to deal with that. The important thing there is to be across a lot of that legislation. GDPR, CCPA, all of the kind of the common ones that we've all been working through over the years. The data and technology, the second point there, it's needed to support this strategy. I mean, it's the infrastructure that we actually build to support it. So some of the challenges there around scale and match rate, they're the top limiters of the ability to use first-party data. Data volume and collection methods is also a challenge there around customer transaction data that we've found across a lot of our clients. That's an obstacle. But of course, that can differ by industry, as I referred to before. And as Brett from Empower mentioned a couple of days ago, democratizing intelligence is really important, putting the data in the hands of the people that actually make some decisions. That helps to kind of close the loop on a lot of this work. And then the third point here, we're all experiencing a talent shortage, and that is very prevalent in this challenge that we have, because we just don't have the data intelligence in our teams. There are enough of them. So it's a supply-demand challenge that we have to overcome. And the last point here around organizational silos, I'm sure we all have stories about this, and I know in the DNA space, I kind of work with my team here and I'm constantly trying to loop in investment and strategy and the business part of the finance part and the HR part. They're all kind of should be intrinsically linked to a lot of this challenge. And a couple of examples where it hasn't been linked is when you have P&Ls that manage the site and they're different to the P&Ls that manage marketing. And it's like, how could that be? But it is the case. We often see that, and that structure and those silos exist, and that become quite a challenge to delivering some of these pieces. So I want to take you through some of the opportunities to collect data, first-party data, and then I'm also going to take you through a couple of examples of how we are actually then using first-party data. So the first one is learning about customers with surveys and data unions. So this one here, if you haven't heard about data unions, I'm hoping that you will know what they are now. New technologies that give users direct control over the data they share with companies. So once users have opted in, advertisers can send them surveys which users complete in exchange for a reward. And that's one way of really kind of building up your first-party data pool of information on your customers. The second one is collecting customer data through in-store experiences. So this is a favorite of mine. I've mentioned it a couple of times already, but a well-designed in-store experience can be used to drive customer interaction and collect contact information, product preferences, or drive product purchase. And in a lot of cases, we often struggle, how to kind of join those two data pieces together. So anything you can do in store, and the picture that we've got here is like, you could go online and you could develop out, a car, a custom-built car with all the features, and then be able to go in store and kind of complete the process by interfacing with an in-store experience there. Immediately, then your online and offline, data points and touch points are actually joined, which is a really kind of great way of doing that. And thirdly, advertise a discount or offer in exchange for data. So who doesn't love a deal? Offering a product discount in exchange for contact information is a great way to establish a relationship and drive consumers to purchase. So lots of examples around that. Difficulty is easy with those ones there. So they're probably something you can kind of do today without much effort. And then super easy is collecting valuable user data at the point of purchase. I don't think a lot of businesses are doing this effectively. Yeah, sure, and we've listed here, collecting payment and address information there that can be very useful to identifying a person. But there could also be an opportunity for you to ask it some additional questions that you might not know about that person. And so, having that as part of the sale cart process is an opportunity. And then collecting customer feedback or reviews. So feedback forms are a great way to re-engage with customers and find out more about their experiences and preferences once they have completed a purchase. This is another example of where, you know, an email might be sent or a notification on a phone, and you're actually then able to use some of that information about the device and about the, you know, the touch point to bring that back into and join data together. So I'm going to go into the couple of examples here that might help to describe how we might use first-party data. This particular example is a B2B client, and they had limited media budget. And this is not an uncommon story, but in this particular case with B2B, you can imagine you don't want to kind of use regular marketing to do that. You need to be very prescriptive. And we saw that there was a lot of waste with regular marketing tactics. On the left-hand side, you've got a whole lot of different model inputs, which are just data points about individuals that has just been joined together to form a single view of the customer. We then built a, you know, by collecting that data, we then built a propensity model that attempted to relate some of the touch points that we had with those who converted. So for those who converted, we kind of analyzed what regular touch points resulted in a conversion. So that relationship became very important for us to then create an audience that specifically looked at those particular people or those types of people. And then we ended up targeting just those people with this, what we would call a high value action. So it could be someone who interacts with the website in a certain way that then resulted in a conversion. So looking at all the people that interact in that way that resulted in a conversion is kind of the key to it here. What we saw by developing this, this approach was an increase of lead generation from 36% to 80%, so a really significant increase in that. There's quite a few of this particular approach in this example that we've used across a bunch of different industries, and it really does work. And then the second example is a favorite of mine, was one of my clients. The challenge was that, you know, if you ever go shopping for tires, you would know how frustrating it is to attempt to purchase tires because you've got a car. I'm not really a car guy. I know it's red, the car, and that's about it. But you know, in this instance here, I need new tires. I have no idea what tires to buy, what brand, what fit, whatever. And so I'm kind of one of many people that feels the same way. When you go to their website, you're inundated with examples of tires, and without that guidance, you just, you know, you end up with a high bounce rate essentially, and that's what we were seeing. So what we did is we took a whole lot of data that we knew about customers, including their geolocation. We had purchase history, site interactions, the car make and model, the seasonality, so you know, what time of year they were purchasing tires, depending on whether it's winter tires versus all season. And then we ended up building that model out, and then that influenced the sort order of the tire results page. And what it ended up being is like the top selection, the top 2 or 3 tires that were presented were actually much more defined and much more kind of targeted to what they needed. And we saw a 67% increase in conversion rate based on this piece of functionality that we built into the site. And that resulted at the time in $1.6 million in incremental revenue. So a very small piece of work resulted in significant revenue gain and a much, much lower bounce rate. So how do you future-proof your client's strategy? As I mentioned earlier, this summit has had a lot of chatter around first-party data. How do you take all that information and action on it? I've tried to distill it down into 4 main focus areas and recommendations for you to take away today. So firstly, developing a trust framework to collect first-party data. This includes adhering to and staying on top of privacy and regulatory trends around GDPR, CCPA, perhaps even biometric regulations. So keeping on top of that is super important for your first-party data strategy. Secondly, I'd suggest that you invest in the 3 T's, which is talent, technology, and team collaboration. You'll likely want to deploy something like a customer data platform, an identity resolution partner or platform, potentially a consent management platform as well as part of this, and then a bunch of clean rooms, because let's face it, the future is going to look like a whole lot of different pieces of this puzzle kind of joined together. So it's not going to be one solution, one silver bullet. So that would enable you to manage all aspects of the first-party data. Thirdly, you're going to want to align consumer needs to business needs. So that's really about kind of understanding what the business challenge is that you're trying to meet, and then developing your first-party data strategy around that, and building up that first-party data to identify a lot of those business challenges. Lastly, you're going to need to know where the business is along the data maturity curve. When you understand that, it actually opens up a lot of opportunities for you to identify those projects, those high priority projects that you'll want to put in place. And part of that is my favorite, kind of creating that North Star vision that enables you to kind of pivot and change as time goes on. So on that note, I'll hand it over to you guys for questions.
Thank you, Corey. Let's have some questions. Yeah.
On one of the previous slides, you talked about clients needing to set up, I don't know what, keep going back. Yeah, I'm asking if it's a build or borrow type experience, if clients are setting up their own data graphs. I think that's what you were calling it.
Yeah. I think in our experience, it depends on the size of the client. So without going into details of particular clients, a large client often will build their own ID graph and their own infrastructure based off their own. They might still partner with the likes of LiveRamp, for example, as an onboarding partner, but ultimately that's kind of how they would approach it. They'd build their own infrastructure. So some of the smaller clients, or actually I would say medium clients, because smaller clients sometimes feel like they're out of the game when it comes to a lot of these expensive platforms, but the medium clients will actually deploy a platform that helps them to build things like a CDP, which we've seen often. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does, but they're still using, even the big clients are still using a LiveRamp, they're still using someone.
Yes.
They're not,
Yep.
It's still a SaaS type, okay.
Yeah, and so if you look across the kind of field of vendors or platforms that are on offer, there's always going to be a need to play with other DSPs or other publishers. And in those cases, you're going to want to, in a kind of cookie world, for example, or a device ID kind of space, you're going to want to be deploying some sort of onboarding partner to identify and dedupe those down to a targetable, addressable set of IDs.
Corey, are any of your clients, are you working with any clients that are finding particularly fun ways of getting data or people to share their data with you? It seems to me that one of the problems is we tend to want to project onto the consumer a certain role that we want for them. A consumer. We want you to be a consumer, so here's a deal. Give us some money, give us some data for the deal. Or we want you to be just like us, a data broker. So here's a data union. We want you to manage your own data. Whereas most people just want to have a little fun. And I have known some, I've seen this in the D2C space, where they ask people to share the things that actually they care about and they have fun with, like who's your favorite celebrity, who's your favorite band. They ask a taste-oriented question that asks them to declare their identity, which they're more than willing to do. And it seems to me that in many ways, when we ask for first-party data, we're dealing with the consumer the wrong way.
Yeah, there's now a proliferation of vendors or businesses that are offering that same service now. I have heard of some that kind of take that angle of like, the content is yours to own and you should make money off that. And you should kind of, the information that you're sharing with these big businesses, they should be paying for that. And I did share a few examples of kind of touching a little bit on that. Data unions was an example there that really kind of tries to build on first-party data by offering people that service. But fun ways, I mean, I'd probably say that the examples I gave you were probably the funnest. But
No,
something that's
yeah.
not so fun is like maybe even just changing the way the site is built so that you're actually registering who the person is upon entry rather than waiting for them to click buy on something.
I guess my point is, I think people are more than happy to share things about themselves. We ask the wrong things. And if we ask the right things, we could glean a lot from people about what they want to share. And I say this because I've talked to a couple of D2Cs that are actually doing this with their own audiences, where they're actually sort of asking, pop culture is the one thing that comes to mind, but sports is another one, where you can glean from those answers a lot. You can infer a lot from that. I mean, in some ways, Camila was telling us that the other day, in the ways in which they poll and profile, the ways in which you can draw a whole set of conclusions and ideas about audiences from a whole host of other data.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. We do have to be inventive about it, and at the end of the day, the response to questions in a survey, or what people are doing on your site, or that all of that data infers something. We just need to be better at kind of being able to understand what those data points mean. There's psychology behind it even, I think.
Hi, we've done some, I work for a college publisher. We've done some tests around first-party cookies and matching with LiveRamp, and we're seeing like 15, maybe 20% match rate. What do you find match rates on on your registration data or customer data now?
So match rate's a funny question because it depends on the data that you're trying to match to, and I'll try to give you some examples. I once had a client say to me, we've got a 95% match rate with LiveRamp. And it's like, okay, well, so what, you unpack that, you realize actually what they're talking about is when they port their first-party data, their actual customer data, into LiveRamp, LiveRamp is able to identify 95% of the people on there. The last 5% are either new customers or people that aren't already in the LiveRamp database or in some other way didn't match, right? That to me is not a match rate that we talk about in the example you just gave. It's, if you look at a kind of